My grandfather told me what happened when they raided the FÜHRERBUNKER. My dedushka grandfather, Vladimir, was in the Red Army during World War II on the Eastern Front from Stalingrad to Moscow to the Battle of Berlin. He had reached the rank of lieutenant and immigrated to the United States in 1953. I was born in America but often made trips to Russia. I loved my grandfather dearly. He would help me with my homework and he grew excited whenever we covered the Eastern Front. He would give me a medal and explain how he won it. But there was one story he would always simplify. The Battle of Berlin. Every time I would ask, he would always tell me to go read a book or use the internet. I noticed he would always grow nervous whenever I pressed for details. His hands shook and his eyes bulged. I had never seen him so terrified in the time I knew him. Time went on and we slowly drifted apart. One day, I was working at a military hospital during my tour with the Russian army when I got a letter from him. Dear Mikhail, I am currently on my deathbed. As you know, I have been sick for quite some time. I will not leave this earth until I have told you what you always wanted to know. Your grandfather Vladimir. I reread the letter a few times. What I always wanted to know. I pondered to myself. I hadn't thought about Berlin for almost 8 years. Nevertheless, I caught a plane to Moscow and I went to his house. The place had nearly fallen apart after years of disrepair. The bank didn't dare try to remove Grandpa, mostly because they knew he was a veteran and he wanted to pass away here and partly because he had beaten a few of their agents back with a Mosin Nagant and a sword. I opened the door to his room, which by now was an old board. Grandpa. I said and I held his hand. He was now bedridden and he had an oxygen mask over his face. Mikhail, how good of you to come, he said as he breathed through the mask. I nodded. He tried to point to his medals. The Battle of Berlin, the proudest day in the history of Mother Russia, he chuckled. Then I noticed his face fall. It was a cold morning in Berlin that day. I was a captain at the time. Myself and Andrei Kaczmarek led a division of the 1st Ukrainian Front. Andrei was my best friend. He shakily pulled out a picture of himself standing next to a young man in his 30s arm in arm. We had just pushed forward to the FÜHRERBUNKER, shooting every single of those cursed fascists. I took great pleasure in ending their lives. I thought about every single one of my comrades who had spilled their blood in the name of the motherland. He squeezed my hand tightly as tears streamed down his face. I only nodded. What else could I do? He cleared his throat. We cleared the rooms easily. Most of the Nazis were either dead by their own hands or executed by us. But then Alexei found a secret door leading to an underground room. My intrigue was piqued. The things we saw, decapitated and mutilated corpses, severed limbs, entrails around us, it was like an animal tore through these people. I looked at him. Why was the room there? I asked. There were these creatures living under the bunker. They looked very much like humans, except their faces were contorted into wide grins. They were 10 feet tall and had pointed ears and jagged teeth with misshapen limbs. They were bald, but extremely strong, and had sensitive hearing. His grip got tighter. Alexei had his throat torn out, then eaten by one of the creatures. Ivan had his arms ripped off. Kravchenko was disemboweled and dragged away. I wanted to throw up right then and there. I can still hear their screams as the creatures dragged my men away to be eaten. I looked at them. But how did you escape, Grandpa? I asked softly. I hid among the bodies, whether they were blind or not I couldn't say. One of them approached me and sniffed the air. I can still recall its breath as I covered my mouth. It smelled of rotting human flesh and blood. And its eyes, its cold, soulless, milky white eyes, they were the worst part of all. They still give me nightmares. He took a deep breath. I made my way to the surface and told my commander about what had happened. He ordered we destroy the entrance so no one else would suffer the same fate. Then, I was sworn to secrecy under threat Stalin would shoot me if I said anything about it. I've kept this secret for more than 70 years, Mikhail. He said. I looked stunned. So that's why you never told me. So, what were the creatures? I asked. He thought about it for a minute. Whether it was one of Mengel's experiments or some kind of Thule ritual, I cannot say. But of this I am certain, Mikhail. They were not human. I think they are creatures from hell. He then fell asleep. I left that night in a panic. What if those creatures were still out there? Would anyone else find them? The next morning, I read in the obituaries that my grandfather passed away. I then decided to take a trip to Berlin. I walked through the halls of the modern FÜHRERBUNKER and went to the ruins of the entrance he had mentioned. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I thought I could hear something scratching against the rocks.